it wasn't that bad in terms of the snow. We certainly had some snow. I wouldn't put it up there among the biggest snows I've experienced in the last couple of years, but it was bitterly cold, and that's
Yeah.
really, I think, what shocked a lot of people, including me. I mean, it was, gosh, it was around negative 30 real feel for a period, a couple days there at night, and really didn't get out of the single digits, for a while, for a
Yeah.
couple days, even in the middle of the day. So very cold conditions. Tough on that score. Thankfully, the snow did not arrive in quite the quantities that some folks were predicting.
Yeah.
I thought we really have something to say about how we move the neighborhood forward. I believe I have the experience, really unmatched experience, when it comes to public policy work among candidates in the race, and an experience being a leader of a large organization, and just as importantly, experience volunteering on the ground in the neighborhood at places like Care for Real or as an ESL tutor, which I've done a fair amount of, which gave me, the experience of knowing what it is we had to do here, what work was necessary. So combining all those things is what really motivated me to run and really motivated me to step forward and say, hey, we have something to say about some of these issues. The beauty of the 48th ward, and just so you know the boundaries exactly, it's really Devon on the north, then the boundary runs down Clark until it reaches Foster. It heads east towards the lake on Foster, and then down Broadway, and then over on Ainsley. And then there's sort of a spur on the lakefront. I don't believe there's any sort of housing in the spur. It's on the other side of Lakeshore Drive. And the lake itself is, of course, the eastern boundary of the neighborhood. And it's, I believe, today the smallest of the 50 wards in Chicago, and among the most densely populated. You can walk east-west the ward in 15 to 20 minutes at a slow pace. You can walk north-south, in 45 minutes at a moderate pace, maybe an hour, a little longer, depending on how fast you move. And I'm laying all this out because really the beauty of the 48th Ward, Edgewater, Uptown, and Andersonville, is that it brings together so many slices of Chicago into that small area. What do I mean by that? So you have Andersonville, the shops, shopping district that people drive to from all over Chicagoland. That has its own unique character, its own history, if you think back to all the groups that have made it home and made it what it is over the years. We have just south of on Devon, right? There's Loyola, a wonderful university. Many folks, part of Loyola's campus is in the 48th Ward. A lot of people who are affiliated with Loyola as students or teachers or staff make their homes in the 48th Ward, and that northern section of the ward is deeply connected to the university. You have the high rises and the mid rises on Sheridan, which are, again, have their own stories, have people who've made those areas home for a long time and brought vitality to those areas. Those are different from everything we've talked about. You have Argyle Street, which has been an incredible center of East Asian culture and a wonderful place that people have enjoyed shopping in, not only from the neighborhood, but from across, Chicagoland. And you have, smaller single family detached homes in Edgewater Glen or Magnolia Glen on the west side of Broadway. Again, each of those different slices of Edgewater brings something to the whole. I had a great time doing it because really what you were doing is going outside in the beautiful weather in September, which is one of the nicest times of year in Chicago, connecting with your neighbors, talking about issues of public policy of concern to everybody, and saying, hey, if you believe in this vision we're sharing, if you believe in what we're trying to do, help me get on the ballot. And I have to say, it wasn't hard. We have to do something about it, because the more time that passes with these vacancies, the harder it is to reverse the process. So action is necessary. It absolutely is a call to action right now to see some of these vacancies. The question is, what can we do about it? What can the alderperson do about it? And the good news is there's quite a lot that can be done. Most importantly, the alderperson really needs to serve as a convener, bringing together property owners, local residents, other businesses on each commercial corridor, the chambers of commerce, and potential investors, potential folks who are interested in opening up there, and try to figure out what we can do to make those openings a reality in a way that benefits the needs of the community. And so we opened this conversation a little bit ago by talking about how, our neighborhood is really looking for those independent businesses and how we can plan ahead to try to encourage that. This is a moment to do just that. And to also make sure that whatever opens is going to be additive to the neighborhood in the right kinds of ways. So what do I mean by that? For example, it's probably not as beneficial as it could be to open up or to recruit a business to some of those storefronts that isn't generating street traffic. So for example, I'll give you an example. If you put 2 banks on a corner, those banks close at 5 p.m., which means that after 5 p.m., there's just fewer people walking in and out of those facilities, and less people being driven to other neighborhood businesses. So we're looking, when we do this, almost certainly, for businesses that'll drive pedestrian traffic, that'll draw people inwards through the entire commercial corridor and make everyone stronger by doing that. Is I believe we need really a 3-part response here in the 48th Ward and citywide to make sure that people are as safe as possible. And the first element of that plan, the first one, is really to attack the root causes of violence through programs that encourage economic opportunity, hope, really making sure that people have hope here in the city of Chicago, that they have the chance to do things the right way, that they have the resources they need to thrive. And we need to do that citywide, because the truth is that while we have 50 different wards in the city of Chicago with those sharp boundaries between them, right down the middle of Clark Street, one's one ward, one's the other, we live in one city. Those boundaries are arbitrary. And if we don't get things right citywide, none of us are going to be able to get ahead. So again, we need to make sure that we implement really programming, social services, supports, resources citywide that make sure that everybody has opportunity, that everybody has hope, that everybody has a chance to thrive, no matter what neighborhood they happen to be born in, no matter what neighborhood they happen to move to. That's point one, and it's the most important point, because an investment in giving people hope here in the year 2022 or 2023, when you publish your writing, that's both great for our year, but it's also an investment in safety in 2024 and 2025 and onwards. A city where people have hope, a city where people have opportunity, is a city that's going to work. So that's number one. The second thing we need to do everywhere, but particularly in the 48th Ward, is we need to make sure that our built environment is designed with safety in mind and is operated with safety in mind. So what do I mean by that? Well, we got to make sure that the underpasses under the red line, for example, that they're well lit every night, that we replace light bulbs that burn out, so no one is in a position where they feel exposed. I want to make sure that our street lamps aren't just, casting a cone of light down the middle of the street, but are also illuminating sidewalks a little bit. So again, people feel like they're in control. We need to make sure we're doing beautification in areas that maybe have gotten a little unruly, because there's a lot of data. There's a great Brookings report on this point. There's a lot of data that says that when we have a beautiful community, we have a community that encourages safety. We got to make sure that our red line stations, and we're rebuilding them right now here in the 48th Ward through the Red Line Purple Line Modernization Project. We got to make sure that those stations are designed from the ground up with safety in mind, so that there's good lines of sight, for example, and that we also, once they are built, really bring them to life and operate them in a manner that keeps safety front and center. So if we do those things, we're going to make a lot of progress on this. People will feel better and more secure and safer no matter where they are in the city, if we can get some of that stuff right. And the third pillar of the three-part strategy that I'm arguing for, that I'm running on, is I really believe strongly we need to get away from this failed militarized policing approach that I think has run rampant in our city and has resulted in people's, unfortunately, their rights being violated way too often. We got to get away from that because it doesn't work. And not only that, it results in these settlements that cost the city millions of dollars. It just has not borne fruit. We got to get away from that. We got to get towards a model that really focuses back to basics in terms of foot patrol officers who are embedded in the neighborhood, who are ideally from the community, whose names people know and whose faces they recognize. And if we can do those three things, attack the root causes of violence, make sure that we are using our built environment the right way, and get back to a community-based model as opposed to a militarized one, we're going to make people feel safer. People will, in fact, be safer. Yeah, so you referenced what I think is a very important document, and I'm glad you read it, and I think more people should read it. The most recent report filed by the Independent Monitor and the Consent Decree, and you correctly noted that a really big chunk of her executive summary on what had to happen really focused on people, and it was wise of her to do that because at the end of the day, a government organization is a group of people doing a job. And if you don't have people, you're not going to succeed. It's worth remembering that it's not just, the recruitment and the retention that's been a challenge. We've also tragically seen a number of officers who committed suicide this year. Each of them has, of course, their own story. But that's a deep tragedy, and it's a testament, I think, to some of the challenges that the department has experienced. Every so often you see a news story which just breaks your heart, and that was one of them. I mean, what they did to Mr. Cremelis, it wasn't right. It violated something that's no one should have to die like that. That's not right. This data comes from the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, which released earlier this year a very important report that really took a look at who are the people experiencing homelessness in Chicago and Illinois. What does that look like? And they found some things that were very interesting. So if you look at just Chicago, there are about 15,000 people in the most recent year for which they had data, about 15,000 people who experience either sheltered or unsheltered homelessness. And so that really is exactly what it sounds like. These are folks who might be living outside or were living in a shelter. But in addition to that, there are close to 50,000 Chicagoans who experience a different kind of lack of housing. And for those 50,000, homelessness was a lot more like was manifested itself as couch surfing, as doubling up, as having to go from friend to friend for a while because they didn't have a place to call their own. Maybe they weren't in a shelter, they weren't sleeping outside, but the report really was a clarion call to say, hey, these are people who are experiencing a lack of housing as well. Many of those folks are not eligible for homelessness services because they are not considered by whatever metric to be adequately lacking in housing, right? Mm-hmm. And that is ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That should be a group where we target for services to make sure they never end up on the street. The second category of policies we need to do a better job on is really how do we help folks who are in that sheltered or unsheltered homelessness category, right? About 15,000 roughly, according to this research, about 15,000 people who might end up in that category. And I think we've seen some promising models for that I think are exciting and I think are worth further exploration. In particular, in a couple neighborhoods in Chicago, we've seen pilot scale programs focusing on rapid rehousing, although they're called different things. And the idea there is you don't just maybe walk up to someone who's in a tent, for example, and living outdoors and say, hey, do you want services? They say no, so you walk away and that's not the right approach. It's a more sustained model, developing trust over a longer period of time, offering services, working together, and eventually aiming to more rapidly rehouse someone into a home where at the same time they can receive more comprehensive services so that they stay there, so that they can get back on track, so that they're empowered to achieve what they're trying to achieve. And we haven't done a good enough job in either of these categories, which is why I think I strongly believe we need an aggressive push in both areas to get to where we need to be, because the truth is the challenge of lack of housing is getting much, much worse over time as more and more housing gets more and more unaffordable. So we've got to be ahead of this trend. It doesn't look like it's going to get easier. Let's make sure Chicago is doing the right thing now and isn't falling behind. For me, the most successful approach that an alderperson can take to supporting schools is to really be a cheerleader for the school community. And what does that mean? That means following the lead of that school community. That means following the lead of the students, the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the librarians, the nurses, the folks who make the school come to life, the parents. Following their lead about what needs to happen there. What are the things that have to happen in that school